publishing this video on June the 28th, 2024, and there's a really good reason why. It's 80 years to the day since the Hellhawks, who were the 365th Fighter Group of the United States Army Air Force, it's when they left Beaulieu Airfield. And that's where I'm walking today. Now, they'd originally arrived here in March of 1944. They'd come from an airfield in Essex called Gosfield. Their 3 months at Beaulieu would be extremely eventful as they flew from the south coast of England. The airfield was the scene of bravery, inspiring stories, and also tragedy and high casualty rates that struck the young men that flew from the fields. And these runways that I'm now stood on, the remains of these runways at least, you can actually see where they intersect. So behind me, down there, that's where one of the runways would have been. And as I pan that way, you can see another one there behind me. And again, if I pan back that way, there it is, that's where they intersect. So it's an A-class airfield. The runways are in the letter A shape, and I'm on one of the intersecting parts right now. During wartime, these runways would have been concrete, as you would expect, and you can still see a little bit of evidence that when you walk around. The reason, especially when you look on satellite views and photographies, that you can still see the ghostly outline of those runways is because the runways were made of concrete, so they had this alkaline in, and it means even to this day the vegetation doesn't quite grow the same. But I'm not here to talk about concrete. I'm here to talk about the men who flew from here, because it's that 80th anniversary that the Hellhawks would leave Beaulieu Airfield and they'd end up on an airfield in France, continuing to support the D-Day invasion. And more importantly than that, I wanted to, in my own way at least, try and commemorate the 17 pilots, the young American men who died serving out of this airfield. Can't possibly tell all their stories. This is a relatively short video after all. But what I will do, I'll be able to tell you a few stories of the men who flew from here. And at the end of the film, I'll put all their names up so you can see who they were and how brave they were, because they gave the ultimate sacrifice. Beaulieu Airfield first opens in 1942. It starts life out as an RAF Coastal Command station. So you have the RAF flying Liberators out over the Atlantic hunting for German U-boats, and then as time progresses you also have lots of Canadian pilots. You even have Czechoslovak units doing similar things. But it's March 1944 that the airfield's handed over to the control of the Americans, and it becomes Station 408, and the first American group to move in, as we now know, are the 365th Fighter Group, also known as the Hellhawks. Now, when the Hellhawks arrive from Essex at Beaulieu, they go into this extreme period of training, because they're going to be doing things potentially on D-Day and beyond that they hadn't been doing before. So they're going to be training in different flight formations, I assume, different tactics, but also dive bombing missions. So that starts around the 3rd of March for about 3 or 4 weeks. They're doing these training periods. Now, it's during this period that the first 2 Hellhawks who fly out of Beaulieu Airfield will be killed. And the first chap to do so is a young man by the name of Stanley Fish. He was just 20 years old, but I say it's reasonably fair to say he was a veteran. I believe he'd previously been based at Gosfield in Essex, unlike some of the pilots who are coming straight from America. And it's rather ironic at the moment where I'm stood, because I'm stood on what would have been the site of where the control tower for the airfield was. And in my mind, at least, this place on the airfield is always intrinsically linked with the story of Stanley Fish, and I'll explain why. He goes off on an exercise by himself in his P-47 Thunderbolt. And rather ironically now, I don't know if you can pick it up, but I've just heard an aircraft going above. So let's just have a quick look. A rather ironic interlude, I suppose we could say. But back to Stanley. So he takes off from the airfield. He's going on a test hop. And the men in the control tower, they see Stanley go off into the clouds. Now, shortly afterwards, they lose all radio contact with Stanley from the control tower. I don't know what's happened to him, so they put messages out to the other local airfields like Holmesley South and Stony Cross. Have they seen or heard from Stanley? But it's a no. A few hours later, rather tragically, Stanley's aircraft is found spread over a large area in the neighbouring county of Wiltshire. Stanley had been killed in an accident, whether it was pilot error or mechanical error, I can't quite recall. But this place here, where I'm stood now, where the control tower once was, this would have been the last bit of human contact that Stanley would have had. I do happen to have small pieces of Stanley's aircraft from that crash site where he came down in Wiltshire. I've long wondered what to do with them since they came into my possession, and I must say they did come into my possession legally with approval from the Ministry of Defence. But what I decided to do today was just bring a small piece of Stanley's aircraft here. I felt it was the right thing to do on this day because it means that 80 years later, at least a part of Stanley's aircraft has managed to return home to the home airfield of Beaulieu. Another one of the pilots to be killed during this training phase during March was a guy called Damon Gause. Now, I don't believe he'd flown with the Hellhawks previously. I think he was posted to Beaulieu straight from the United States. But the reason I'm mentioning him is because he has an incredible backstory before he gets here. Now, certain elements of his story have been disputed, but what we do know is that he was in the Philippines, he was fighting in the army, he was captured, and he manages to escape with another American guy, and they sail something like 3,200 miles from the Philippines to Australia, which takes them 159 days. We know that this bit's true because there's newspaper reports and photography from it. There are aspects of his story that people have questions, but it's not for me to do that, about him killing a Japanese prisoner of war guard and other various aspects to the story. So I will leave that up to you to investigate. However, we do know that once he gets to Beaulieu, he doesn't get into any action again. He, like Stanley Fish, who I just mentioned. Damon takes off again on a test flight. I think he's meant to be doing some dive bombing testing, and about a mile from where I'm stood now, he comes down in the village of East Boulder and he's killed. So such an incredible story he had before he gets to Beaulieu, and then once he gets here, it ends rather quickly. I've mentioned how there were 17 Hellhawk pilots who died during this 3-month period at Beaulieu Airfield, and that's entirely true, but I do really feel it should be 18 because there was another man who died, but he's not really spoken about. His name was William Schaffer, and I'll be honest, he was not a Hellhawk, but I do feel he should be remembered too, and this is why. On the 9th of June, the Hellhawks have a delivery of 4 new P-47 Thunderbolts. 3 of them successfully land on the airfield, but William Schaffer's a ferry pilot and he's delivering another one where a tragic incident occurs. Eyewitnesses of ground crew were on the airfield and they see one of the P-47s coming from that direction. Now in the distance there, you may just be able to see the Isle of Wight, so we're looking in a southerly direction, and there's the northerly direction. So one P-47 was coming from that direction down from south to north, but at the same time, whether it was William or the other P-47 Hellhawk, I'm not sure, but at the same time another P-47 was coming from that direction, so west to east. Neither saw each other. Horrified witnesses, like I said, ground crew, I'm sure other pilots as well, they see both aircraft land on the concrete runways. And it's roughly in this point here, we're at the intersection now, where those 2 runways meet. The aircraft were on the concrete at speed and they collide into each other. Now the aircraft, the P-47 that William Schaffer was piloting, was cut in half, quite catastrophically. William was seen to jump from the aircraft and he seemed to manically run for a few seconds before, rather tragically, he dropped dead, perhaps in this spot here. So I do feel that William should also be remembered when we speak about the Hellhawks, because he gave his life too, albeit in rather different, yet still very tragic circumstances. At the start of this film, I explained how the concrete runways at Beaulieu Airfield had been pulled up in 1959, but that wasn't strictly true. As you can see behind me now, there still remains a little bit of concrete runway that has been untouched. And it made me wonder, there's this fantastic piece of vintage footage from D-Day, June 6, 1944, which shows Hellhawks leaving Beaulieu Airfield and being waved off as they go down the runway. I wonder if this was that exact spot that bit of footage was filmed, and I'm showing that on an overlay as I speak. Now, as I'm sure you start to realise now, that day didn't come without cost. Rather coincidentally, 47 P-47s took off that day to support the Allied invasion, but 2 of them wouldn't come back. The men lost on that first day were Robert Shipe and J Martell. I'm now walking into what would have been a concrete hard standing area or a dispersal pad. This, it might be hard to believe when we look at it now, but this was a large round concrete pad where aircraft would have been parked up. There may have been 1 or 2 P-47s parked up here waiting to go into action. I thought this a good point to tell you another story about one of those pilots lost in action. That was a guy called John Weese on June the 10th. And in fact, June the 10th saw 3 pilots from the Hellhawks killed. It wasn't just John. Raymond, Moraga and Donald Swinburne were also killed in action. But I just wanted to talk about Weese for a moment, because his story is linked to this, and I don't know if this is the right word to use, but I struggle really. This iconic photo that I'm showing now, or at least a very memorable one, of a P-47 on a beach in Normandy, and that was Weese's aircraft. On June the 10th, he'd taken off from Beaulieu Airfield with his compatriots, and he was hit by flak over the sea, and he ends up coming down in the water. There was some radio contact before he came down. He made no indication that he'd been hurt, but the tragic thing was, once he was recovered, he was dead. And that photo we see of his P-47 Thunderbolt on the beach there is where the aircraft was pulled ashore. Now, John was 24, similar age to a lot of these Hellhawk pilots, and he was buried near the site of his air crash. And there's another photo I'm going to show you which shows some French women tending his grave. Now, I'm happy to say that John Weese, he was repatriated in 1949, but many airmen who died in battle weren't, and they're in French cemeteries to this day, and some bodies were never recovered at all. But the interesting thing for me is when you read the letters that men in the Hellhawks wrote back to their families and sweethearts, it becomes really quickly obvious that sometimes they don't really know where it is. I mean, at the moment, I'm where I live. This is the New Forest. It's Beaulieu Airfield. I know it extremely well, but I'm pretty sure that to some of those young men who are being shuttled from airfield to airfield in England in that lead up to D-Day, they didn't really know where they were at all, because they certainly weren't getting time to get used to their surroundings, such was the preparation they were making for D-Day. So it's rather tragic, I find, and poignant when you realise they're killed thousands of miles from home and often didn't really know even where it was they were flying from properly. I'm just walking back onto the main airfield now from this dispersal area I just showed you, but before I got back onto the airfield I just wanted to show you something really briefly, and it's this. It's a United States Army Air Force ring. It was found on this airfield, on the runway in fact, after the Americans had left. Now, just for context, the Hellhawks were the first American group to be here, but after the Hellhawks left in June, the 323rd Bomb Group moved in for a couple of months as well. But this ring that I'm showing you now, that was discovered by an RAF ground crew member on the runways, and I have it in my possession now. And I have to think, was someone in such a hurry to get in their aircraft that this came off as they were leaving? And did this belong potentially to one of those Hellhawks pilots? I have absolutely no way of knowing, but regardless, it meant something to someone, and it certainly does to me now. The last pilot story I want to talk to you about today is that of Wallace Eugene Rock. He took off from Beaulieu Airfield on June 22nd, and along with his compatriots who'd taken off that day, they become quickly embroiled in a dogfight with the Luftwaffe, and Eugene becomes a casualty of that. He's shot down by a Messerschmitt 109. Not particularly unusual for an Allied aircraft to get shot down. And don't get me wrong, the Hellhawks had their rather healthy return of enemy kills, but what makes Wallace Eugene Rock's story so unusual is the fact that he was declared missing in action, and after some time presumed killed in action, because his body was never found until 19 1993, when his body was found by a Frenchman in a marsh in Normandy. And then by 1995 he'd been officially identified, and thankfully they managed to take him back to the United States, and he was buried with full military honours. So that's just a few of the tales. I've not been able to tell you all 17 stories, or 18 as we established, but I hope this has given you some insight into the sacrifices that those American men made when they flew from this airfield. I mean, this airfield has a fantastic rich history. It wasn't just American airmen who were killed, there were multiple nationalities given the length of time the airfield was open. But today at least I wanted to come here and honour those airmen who flew with the 365th Fighter Group, also known as the Hellhawks.